Welcome to Window on the World. I'm your host, Yaneli Lopez. And today we have a student who traveled to Canada in preparation for our Canada-themed semester. Canada is the world's second largest country. It also has the world's largest coastline, which makes it a great place to gain new experiences and inspiration. And we are here today with the Jordan Skelton and instructor Kyle McKenzie. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Doing great.
So we're going to start off by talking about the trip to Canada. So what made you want to go on this trip?
I always wanted to go to Canada, to be honest. Just the nature and just seeing all the cool mountains and the wildlife and mooses.
Did you have any city specifically in mind?
Well, I want to go to Toronto first, but I was going to Vancouver, and I was like, yeah, I want to go to Vancouver.
That's good. So for Kyle, Canada is the theme semester this year. So how did you go? You guys went to Quebec and Vancouver. How did you go about picking those cities to travel to?
Initially, if you could see the draft that I had of the itinerary at first, it was much more elaborate than that. But Canada, I should have thought about, is gigantic. So, my initial plan was to go to Vancouver on the west coast and then just sort of hop our way across. But the expense associated with each of those flights would have made it impractical. So I just picked Vancouver and then Montreal in Quebec, just for the contrast, so that we could see a really broad range. Montreal and the whole province of Quebec have a very kind of old European feel to them. Being in Montreal feels a lot like being in Paris or someplace like that. But Vancouver, on the other hand, is extremely modern. It's kind of similar in some ways to our West Coast cities. It wasn't a very big city until the last 100 years or so, so it's actually very
Evolved, I guess.
very modern, and it's sort of the Hollywood of Canada. They film lots of movies are filmed in Vancouver, and
Yeah.
but I picked the places really for the contrast. The art department always tries to go to the places ahead of time. Which sometimes means usually means that we're putting together trips for places we don't maybe actually know that much about. We're sort of learning alongside the students.
Okay.
So that's,
Well, there are other cities that once you guys were maybe going through that you're like, you know what, let's actually just stop here and do it.
Well, I would like to, yeah. We flew between them, but we did do some day trips out and around. On the West Coast, we went up into the mountains. There's a ski resort called Whistler. That was just amazing. I would go there again,
Yeah,
for sure.
Again.
But we went to Victoria, Vancouver Island, to the capital of British Columbia, Victoria, city on an island out there. That was that was, to me, one of the highlights was actually that ferry ride to it. There was about, 3-hour, 4-hour ferry ride to get out there.
The whole ride itself?
And just through the mountains, because it's all these, it's sort of north of Puget Sound in Washington, and that whole area up there is just dotted with tons of these sort of mountain islands. And it's just a beautiful place.
I personally like more landscape views than...
Yeah.
So we know this is part of a 3-credit hour course for the art and place in Canada. So as a student, what was the requirement you had to complete to be able to go on this trip?
The requirement was that we had to complete a couple different watercolor studies for the trip, depicting different places that we visited in Canada. To pick a spot and create small paintings for each location. That's one of the requirements for it.
Do you normally do paintings?
Every now and then I do paintings. I'm used to it, but it's not my expertise.
Yeah.
But I can do a painting.
You'll do it. So what are some challenges you guys faced going on this trip? Was it hard getting, you guys went on plane, correct? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Was it hard getting there from plane?
It wasn't too bad. It was, like I say, everything was it's so big, everything's spread out. So we had to, that was sort of, everywhere we went was a long trip.
So
If
you
we
kind of
went,
have to be in the mood for a plane.
yeah,
to go.
yeah. I was surprised because normally we go to Europe or overseas, but the flights were almost as long to get around Canada as those. But.
So we also know you guys obviously went to Quebec and I think Old Quebec is known more as a French-speaking city, and I know that there, some do speak English, but mostly French. Was there any language barriers you guys faced?
Not
Did
too
you?
many.
No. We were in Montreal, which I think is kind of, it is a French-speaking city, and you would hear people speaking French to each other, but everyone speaks English.
Yeah.
I do think some of the people in the group mentioned that they had a little bit of trouble here and there, but there's such international cities, both Vancouver and
Kind of,
Montreal, that you just have Vancouver is actually, I don't want to get this wrong, so look it up if you're. but I believe it's one of the biggest cities in the world that doesn't have like a majority of people in one kind of dominant cultural background. Like there's no dominant ethnicity.
Okay.
It's I think the largest ethnic group in Vancouver is Asian, which is like 30% of the population. So Vancouver just has people from absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. And I think that was maybe one of the things that struck me when we landed
Yeah.
is how just incredibly diverse and modern
Something you
Vancouver
don't really
felt.
I guess consider that going to different countries, but
Yeah.
it still
Yeah.
shows. So of course, speaking of language, we all have our own accents and stuff. Was it hard understanding? Do Canadians have accents as well? Was it hard for
Yeah.
them to understand you guys even?
Probably.
Probably. Yeah.
Did you find it challenging
Not too challenging. Just spoke like slightly different from.
from how
Yeah.
we,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
So of course, you guys did discuss food earlier, but what were some meals that you guys ate?
I ate a lot of stuff. So, like as Kyle mentioned, it's an incredibly diverse place, but it's also known for its diverse food. You can find a lot of different restaurants from a different cultures with different types of cuisine. I went to this Malaysian restaurant when I was walking around Vancouver, which was pretty awesome. It had like this really cool coconut rice and kind of like stew. We also tried the native food, like forceful food, went to a Force People restaurant, and they served like salmons and there was something else.
There's that flatbread.
Yeah, a flatbread.
There's the famous flatbread from up there.
Yeah.
Is it like just like only Canada? Is like a native Canadian?
It's
Yeah.
it's very much like I don't know if it's, I think it's mostly just like West Coast indigenous, and so there's a restaurant there, Bannon I think is maybe the name of the bread.
Yeah, I think so.
There was a restaurant in Vancouver we all went to as a group, that is like an indigenous-owned, like traditional indigenous food. And it's right on the coast, so it's a lot of fish, and it's wild produce like wild mushrooms and.
Is it more natural, I guess?
Yeah,
Kind
I
of,
think
in a
so.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it different than how American food is?
Yeah.
Like even the taste and everything?
There was just a huge range of things. I mean, obviously, like being such diverse places, it's just every kind of food. It's there was more French, and in fact, I noticed I think a little bit of kind of Cajun sort of food in Montreal. I don't know, maybe the French influence mixed with.
Some of the,
Although they did have, did you get the? I didn't personally partake of the poutine fries at
Oh.
McDonald's, but you can get poutine
Yeah,
at McDonald's in Canada.
You can.
is
Did
there
you do-
is there McDonald's meal or the meal is it different from here?
I don't know. I didn't.
There were some things that were different, if I remember. They had the poutine fries, and there was something else you could have gotten with it. I don't remember right now. I really don't.
Say it is.
But every McDonald's is kind of like different in each country.
That is
Yeah.
true. It's like
They had a lot of the same chains that we
Yeah.
have, actually.
So, did you guys notice any different cultural aspects of Canadian? Like, for example, here in the U.S., we don't necessarily say hi to everybody we see. Is that something that's in Canada as well, or are they different?
I felt it felt fairly similar
Yeah.
to me culturally, as far as that kind of on the street stuff. Definitely felt more familiar as an American than, say, when I go to Scandinavia or somewhere.
Okay.
But I don't know. What was your experience with that?
Well, I don't think a lot of people said hi to me a lot, but but I think everyone was pretty nice. One thing that was really different was like how much people biked around Vancouver.
Okay.
Like there was a big biking culture. Like everyone can like have a bike and just drive around. Like, even at like the bridges and where we were, there were a lot of people on bikes and being pretty active. A very active city.
You're very active.
Yeah.
That actually leads into my next question: is how did you guys get around, like even on the roads and stuff?
Public transportation was great in Vancouver, especially because Vancouver hosted the Olympics several years back, and the one of the requirements when you host the Olympics is building up your infrastructure for
For
public
traveling.
transportation. You have to have like a direct train from the airport, and so it was very easy to get around just by public transportation.
Is it just like a bus like you would
Yeah,
be
there's
here?
buses, there's subways, kind of overland tram cars, and then when we went on, we'd do like day trips that we just sort of get on these chartered kind of group things.
Are the roads different, like direction-wise, or is it similar pretty much?
It's felt the same. It felt,
Yeah.
I mean, as someone who grew up in the middle of the U.S., everywhere I go feels sort of scary traffic-wise. Like I guess we're spoiled, and
Yeah.
you know, it
We're
always
kind of
feels
empty around here.
feels very busy and very hectic. Well, in Vancouver again, because it grew so fast, the roads are terribly congested because the city wasn't built for as much traffic as it has. So I was really glad we were on. A few times we were on chartered buses because buses get special lanes. So we'd zoom by these like mile-long lines of traffic.
Yeah.
But I was glad not to be driving in Vancouver.
Not
to be
something you'd
honest.
want to do.
No.
Did it differ from city to city?
It felt a little less busy, a little more traditional, like kind of just being in Kansas City or something. When we were in Montreal, it felt like more of a kind of what I'm used to. But
Yeah, Montreal felt more like Kansas City. Well, in terms of like driving.
yeah,
Did you get to drive at all?
No, you took the bus and
Yeah.
train.
So of course, so what are some places that you guys went that you love the most or that's most memorable to you?
Well, I think the Vancouver Park, the
Stanley
Stanley
Park.
Park,
there, yeah. Oh, yeah.
when I first got there was like a bunch of bald eagles just flying around.
Really?
Yeah, so I found it like really interesting. Like I'm in Canada and look, there's a bunch of bald eagles. You know?
Just like, was someone like training them or they were just there?
Just wild.
there,
Yeah,
it's
Just wild.
they just live up there. Yeah.
Is there, what about landscape? What was like one site you guys were like, okay, this,
I think when we went up in the gondola in the mountains, the coastal mountains over there, it's just amazing because you'd get up above everything and you could just full panorama of snow-covered mountains. I guess I wasn't expecting that dramatic of a landscape out that far. I thought more like the Rockies. I would expect that, but out on the coast, I didn't realize it was quite so much like that.
Yeah.
is the weather the same over there than it was here?
It was a little cooler. Well, when we went, I think it was like pretty mild the weather. It wasn't as like cold. It wasn't really like hot as I thought it would be.
Vancouver's like not far from like Seattle, so it's got a very kind of moderate climate. So it snows
Kind
a
of-
little, but not very much, and then I think it gets pretty warm in the summer. But Montreal is more like, you know, New York or something. So, or north of New York, obviously. So it's got some, you know, it snowed when we were there in March
Oh, really?
in Montreal. Yeah, but Vancouver was beautiful. It was 70 degrees every day.
How far, okay, so that's one, how far is Vancouver from Quebec then?
It's all the way across. So,
That's like
so
across-
Vancouver is north of Washington State, and Quebec is north of like Buffalo, New York.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's a
That is quite, quite
a
a
big
distance, quite a
distance,
ways.
yeah.
All right, so we are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to go get more into what inspirations you guys found at
Okay.
Canada.
Okay.
All right.
thanks.
All All right, and we are back to continue talking about Canada. So, what were some locations or places that you visited that you found the most inspiration?
Well, next to the mountains in Vancouver, I went to a small beach, and there we got to get a good panorama view of all the mountains and all the snowy peaks. There's also a bunch of sea lions there
Really?
that I really enjoy looking at, and just seeing people just walk along the beach and just having a good time just really inspired me a lot.
Did you find any inspiration in architectural designs or any buildings that you're like, wow?
There's a lot of really cool buildings.
Are there?
Yeah. I would say yes. Compared to like different cities I've been to, like the architecture is very strange. Like it's very creative. Like they had this one building that just had like a big curve in it.
Yeah.
Like it kind of like hard to describe. Like it's like a skyscraper, but it had like one like piece just cut out of it, and it was really weird, but it was really like pretty. And there was this other building that had like a bunch of text written on it. Like I forgot what the exact word was, but it was filled with just a lot of text.
So, are they like designed differently than they are here?
Yeah, they're more creative.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think it's, Vancouver, it grew so fast that the buildings are very modern and there's just all this experimentation. Whereas, Montreal is, like I said, I mean, it's got modern buildings, but it also a lot of, 200-year-old buildings that sort of feel like the European capitals, But that range is really interesting, I think. They felt like they're very different cities. Vancouver and Montreal felt
Just
completely
like a whole
different.
different thing, whole
Yeah.
different setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we know you went to get inspiration for your art. Can you describe your personal art a little bit to us?
My personal art.
Like, how would you describe your art style, I guess?
I would describe it more of a illustrative work. I like to blend both like typography and illustration together to make something like interesting, like send a message to like the viewer. And to use like very like interesting colors or like very saturated colors for my work. I guess my work is just like trying to like describe a place to someone that's never really been there. Just
So you
just-
try to put that, because we discussed a little bit about painting.
Yeah,
So what, besides painting, what else do you do for art?
I draw a lot of drawings.
Drawings?
Yeah.
Okay. And so for when your inspirations, did it change the way you create your own art, or did it add to your art, the way you make it now, I guess?
I added to my art.
Added to your art. And so we know you are preparing to make an art piece for an art exhibit. Can you give us some details that you use in your art based off of Canada?
When we were visiting some of the museums, there were a lot of native artwork, and they use a unique flow in their work. It's like a mixture of both like abstract and realism. Like they will have a certain forms they will use for different animals, like for like bears and like eagles. They will have like different patterns of color, and it's really like abstract way pattern. Like you tell what it is, but you can't really. It's the same still they use for like the totem poles, and I really like enjoy looking at it.
Yeah. All right. So does traveling to a different country or participating, does you feel like it actually helps with the education?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I think there's a reason that the art department's leaned really heavily into the international program here. And I think going anywhere helps you sort of think more creatively, just sort of build that toolbox of experiences. Because, I think making art is about technique and about skill and all of this, but if all you ever do is stay in your studio and make things, at some point you don't have anything to make art about. So getting
Yeah.
out and just kind of seeing the world itself is very important. And I think just having seeing new cultures and new places helps you reflect on your own culture and place also. Like I think it kind of, you realize some things are sort of universal, but then there's other things that, like, well, they do this differently. I hadn't thought of that. Maybe that's a good way to consider in the future.
Yeah.
And I think from this, for students, I think I went to school here, and I think one of the more transformative things in my education was, traveling with the international program. And so,
So you see a
we keep
benefit
that
to
going, yeah.
joining this program?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you see a benefit to this program?
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
Not
So,
just because I'm sitting here.
Yeah, not because. Yeah.
so, so what are new experiences that you guys experienced there that you can't get here in the U.S.?
I think a lot of things. Nice public transportation. I have to think about this. Just the contrast between like city and nature is like one of the biggest differences, and also the wider range of different cultures in one place that you could find. And also the how they respect the native, how they have this very good balance with their native culture and their current, what's the best word for it?
The sort of reconciliation
Yeah, the
between the sort of mainstream Canadian society is addressing, kind of past problems. I think in a much more forward way than the U.S. really has so far. And it's kind of visible everywhere. In fact, since we left, and I don't know if you have this experience where, maybe if you get another car, suddenly you see that car everywhere.
Yeah.
Ever since we got back, I keep hearing little bits of news about Canada, and I'm like, I feel like I didn't hear those things before. But for instance, there's one of the groups that we dealt with a lot on the West Coast, and our tour guide, we took an Indigenous walking tour in Stanley Park, which is a kind of island woodland park in Vancouver. And there was this Indigenous-led and designed walking tour where this guy he took us around and showed us, what different plants would have been used for, and just kind of explained a lot of kind of associations with nature. But he was from this island nation known as the Haida, which is kind of up north on the coast a little bit. I think it's maybe almost to Alaska, actually. But since we got back, I saw in the news that the Canadian government has agreed to cede the island back to the Haida Nation. Like there'll be a self-governing with some sort of power sharing thing. But so it's there's very much an effort to kind of move forward, I guess, in a kind of more cohesive manner.
Yeah. So while you guys were down there, and as you mentioned, just learning, also about natives and the culture and stuff like that, is there stuff you guys learned that maybe you can't put in your art because it might be like something controversial or anything like that?
Yeah. When I was studying like the different ways they make the art, like I learned that there's a unique tradition with how they do it. Like you can't like just make the same exact artwork because it's like passed down in their family. So if you like doing it, make the exact same type of drawing, it'll be kind of disrespectful.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like each tribe has their own unique way of like making different symbols, and that's like specific to that tribe, and you can't really like tread it too much. Kind of like you're stealing their way of life.
So like you couldn't use something from their tribe if you're not from their tribe.
Yeah.
For their art.
That's always an interesting thing traveling with art students too, is because you want to learn about the cultures, but then you don't want to just sort of repackage what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, especially with Indigenous groups, like a few years ago, I went to Australia and had a similar thing. A lot of times the art making is actually sort of tied up in like ritual practice. And it just feels sort of shallow to appropriate that and just sort of make stuff in the style of it, basically. So I think that's something like you're mentioning. Like,
Yeah.
it's an interesting balance to take the inspiration, but not just sort of steal it.
Just
Yeah.
stealing it. Like, I know appropriation is like a pretty big thing, or like
Yeah.
kind of like a touchy subject lately and stuff. And so when you learn about cultures, you go about seeing what you're allowed to do and not to do, even just for like an art piece. Because even though your intentions aren't bad, someone else is gonna be like,
Sure.
okay, you did
Yeah,
that.
he'll be like, you're not allowed to do that. You know,
Did you add anything to your art that's like maybe native based?
a bit, but not too appropriate. Just like some aspects of native culture.
Yeah, just in that. So, would you consider going back to continue learning over there, or even go for like much longer trip, maybe?
Yeah, I would. So
Would you go back to the same cities, or would you actually go more out?
maybe more out, maybe to the same cities and a bit more out. Before.
For as a teacher for planning, if you guys were to go again, would you also pick the same places?
Well, for the same practical reasons, probably, but there are some great places. I'd love to go to some of the smaller cities. They're just kind of out of the way, but like, Edmonton has really great artwork, and, all the Rocky Mountain places would be just beautiful places to see. I'd also like to go to the far east too, where there's, the kind of rugged coastline and on the Atlantic Ocean as well. But
So there's like a little bit for like any style of artist, basically.
yeah, it's kind of like the U.S. We've got the full. If you traveled all the way across, you'd see such a broad range of things.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate that we just
Stay somewhere.
that money is
Money is
money
like
is
the
always going to be an issue when you try to plan a trip with
Yeah,
10 flights in it.
that is true. I've always been here in the Midwest, and I always see videos of people like, oh, go to Oregon for this and that. And like just being somewhere for so long, you forget there's even other places
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
But, so would you recommend to other artists to visit Canada?
Yes, I would definitely.
Yeah.
All right, and so for anybody wanting to visit Canada, what are some things you would tell them to be prepared for?
The weather, yeah. Depending on what time you go, the weather could be like really different. Be really cold, some be really like warm. It could be like snowing all day.
It's true. What would you tell?
I think it's not. The places we went are not that unfamiliar. I think for a lot of Americans, I think that they'd feel fairly at home. As with traveling anywhere, I would just advise, realize you're a guest and just sit and listen more than, engage local people in conversations if they are into it.
Yeah.
But listening, I think.
Would you suggest traveling and playing, or just taking your car with you?
It would be great to have a car to drive, but it'd have to be a long trip. it'd
would.
be an epic road
Yeah.
trip to go between very many places in Canada. But
I would tell them to go to Vancouver Island and go to to visit many monuments there.
The monuments and
yeah,
stuff. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it, and can't wait to see your arts and see how the inspiration influenced your art pieces. Thank
Thank
you so
you.
much. And thank you for watching Window on the World. I'm your host, Yaneli Lopez.